Here's the genesis of this. I began a position as a senior researcher for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in my spare time, so to speak, in March of this year. And of course, as soon as I began, the pandemic was upon us. And I began noticing that communities were moving really, really quickly to put small business assistance programs in place to try to keep small businesses alive during this, sort of immediate shutdown that hit us. And as I talked to the people who were putting these programs together, and they were happening at an accelerating rate, obviously there are hundreds of them now, they were telling me a lot of interesting things about roadblocks they were running into, insights they were having that they really hadn't had into small businesses before. And out of it, I started putting together sort of a list of things that seemed like important lessons that we were learning and important sort of stumbling blocks that needed to be pointed out. And so based on that, I put together this publication, which is free for you to download, about safeguarding small businesses during the pandemic. And I've grouped these into sort of 3 categories. Before I start there, I wanted to just say something about, I think this is, from the mayors and city staffers that I've spoken with, one of the most stressful times, certainly in the last century for local leaders. And hats off to all of you who have hung in there and are doing really amazing things to work this all out and find solutions. We're all still learning from it, and you guys are in the front lines, and from everything that I've seen, doing just a phenomenal job. So I divided these sort of strategies into 3 categories. The first were things that need to happen to provide quick relief to keep businesses afloat. And initially these were things like helping them pay the April or May rent, figuring out how to get hand sanitizing stations in place, basic things that we've all kind of done now. Next are things to help businesses adapt and pivot, given that they're not going to be able to operate in the same way, certainly not probably for the next year, and maybe never. This is both closing off some market opportunities to businesses, but also opening some new ones. And then finally, later, which is now sort of beginning to come into perspective, but fixing systemic problems that the pandemic has laid bare. And I'm going to spend most of my time talking about those next and later things, and not the first. I wanted to mention a few of the first things. This is the entire list of those first strategies. And like I say, you can download those from the ILSR's website. Helping small businesses apply for federal financial relief is already kind of scratched off the list, unless Congress does in fact put together a new relief package. And it sounds like this week it's looking a little bit more hopeful that might help and happen. And there might be some combination of a second PPP, as well as some specialized programs for minority-owned businesses, for restaurants. But we'll see. We don't know. If your community has not yet created a local small business financial relief program, I really encourage you to do it. This is making a big difference in a lot of places. And we could talk about some of the ins and outs of those later if you wanted to, but I'm going to move on to a few other things. Here's some examples. The first generation of these, like I said, kind of were meant to deal with immediate crises, like helping struggling businesses pay the April and May rent. And now they've sort of evolved into other sorts of things that combine technical assistance and long-term financial workouts, in addition to providing some ongoing support to keep businesses afloat. Helping businesses negotiate with landlords to relieve rent pressure is something that a lot of local governments have been actively involved in during the pandemic. And either doing one of 2 things has been my observation. One is either helping them convert from a set rent per square foot to a lower base rent with a percentage of sales above that, or simply helping them extend their lease term later and amortize the missed rent payments over that longer period of time. I wanted to skip down to this one, which is ensuring that big box and dollar stores that sell food and other things, are adhering to the same rules that small non-essential stores are required to follow. It became, obviously in the beginning of the pandemic, lots of small businesses that were specialty businesses had to close down, clothing stores, bookstores, toy stores, things like that. But somebody could go to a big box store or to a dollar store to buy groceries. And while they were there, they could also buy clothes and books and toys and shoes and all the things that they could not now buy from the independently owned single purpose businesses. There were some communities that acted very, very quickly to close this down. a county in Missouri was the first to say, wait a second, we need to make sure that these stores are closing off their non-essential departments, still making those things available by curbside pickup or delivery, as with every other business. But that not only was it for the purpose of providing a more healthy shopping environment and eliminating some risks, but also, kind of leveling the playing field for the small businesses that were not open to the public. So if you have not done that yet, I'd recommend you look into it. I'd also recommend looking into capping the app-based restaurant meal delivery commissions and fees. The big companies, Grubhub, Postmates, Uber Eats, DoorDash, they command 95% of the delivery market, and they charge rates between 15 and 30%, and sometimes more than that, because they add on marketing fees and advertising fees, and often fees for services that restaurants haven't even requested. This is a receipt from a pizza restaurant in Chicago that's floated around the internet quite a bit in the past couple of months on restaurant websites. Basically, this restaurant sold $1,042 worth of meals through Grubhub in March, but only got $376 of it. Restaurants typically operate on margins of 10 to 12%, and if they're spending 15 to 30 or 40 or 50% paying delivery apps, it doesn't work for them. Before the pandemic, restaurants tended to use these delivery services, these third-party delivery services, as a loss leader to bring in new customers and gain some exposure for their restaurants, but it usually didn't account for more than 5 or 6% of their overall sales. Now that they're almost completely dependent on delivery services, it puts them in a very vulnerable position. And so lots of places are beginning to pass ordinances that cap those development fees at 10% or 15% and prohibit the delivery apps from adding on additional services and also from doing things that the restaurants haven't requested. California is considering an assembly bill right now called the Fair Food Delivery Act, which would prohibit these third-party delivery services from creating their own sort of parallel websites and getting orders that way. Postmates has 40,000 of these non-partner websites online in California right now, and did $200 million worth of business through August of this year from those bogus websites. So this bill would put an end to that. New Jersey is considering a similar thing, and there are about 4 or 5 states that are now considering statewide delivery fee apps. So, and here's some examples. This one is actually an example of something that's wonderful that's sort of happening out there. Americans are great at innovation. This is an example of about 2 or 3 dozen different kinds of delivery apps that I've come across. This one, Knock Knock KC in Kansas City, was designed by a guy named James Tate, who figured out a sort of a different model for this, where he charges restaurants on an hourly basis for uniform delivery staff who are completely trained in that restaurant's food preparation and food packaging preferences, and the restaurant just pays an hourly rate for the deliverer gets to keep all of the tips, and it's working well for the local economy and for the restaurants. Another great example are companies that are creating platforms for online ordering, and a restaurant can either provide its own delivery staff, or people can just use it for curbside pickup and delivery. ChowNow is sort of a leader in this, and I'll come back to them a little bit later. Looking at the things that come next, helping businesses adapt and pivot. The first of these is helping be flexible about the rules. And this is something I'm sure all of you are very far down the road with now, of making curbside pickup possible, and helping businesses install walk-up windows, creating new outdoor seating spaces. This is going to obviously hit some bumps as we move into cooler weather. And Chicago did something kind of interesting that I wanted to make sure you all knew about over the past few weeks. They partnered with IDEO to do basically a crowdsourced idea generation thing for encouraging and supporting safe outdoor dining and entertainment during cold weather. And they've come up with 640 different possibilities. Many of them are variations on some sort of outdoor dining pod, but there are a few that are really creative. There was one that suggested running copper and PVC pipe under the sidewalks and streets, and heating them basically, so making the downtown streetscape a radiant heating system that would not only keep people warm while they're dining, but would also melt snow and ice on the sidewalks. Holland, Michigan did that years ago for a completely different purpose, but it's worked very well for over 25 years so far. So we're trying to stay ahead of this one and see what communities are doing as they move towards winter outdoor dining. And I'd love to hear a little bit later in this hour what some of the things are that you're exploring. Helping businesses operate safely. Again, I think everyone is pretty far down the road on this and finding ways to do it. A few communities have gone a little bit farther. Ithaca has asked businesses to take basically a pledge that says that these are the safety protocols that they've agreed to follow, and they get a placard in their window that's either red, yellow, or green, depending on the level of compliance that they have with that pledge, so that customers know before they go into a store how safe the store is and what protocols they're using. There are a couple of communities, and this was based on CDC guidance from a week or two, that are beginning to install panic buttons in their stores because of this crazy controversy over mask wearing and aggressive customers coming in saying they're not going to wear masks. So this is one of these things I'm seeing emerge in the category of helping businesses operate safely, is how we make sure that there's adequate control for things like that. I'm going to skip over number 12 and talk about getting small independently owned businesses online. This one is has flummoxed me for years. At the beginning of the pandemic, the National Main Street Center did a survey of 5,800 small businesses around the country and found that 60% of them still had no online presence, like not even a website, but not even like a Twitter handle or nothing on Instagram. They had no online presence whatsoever. That has, as you can imagine, changed very quickly. A lot of businesses have jumped onto Shopify, whose business has almost doubled in the past 6 months, helping them put small websites up and running. And there are some communities that are doing this on sort of a wider scale. Detroit has launched a digital Main Street program where they do a sort of a digital onboarding session where they learn about what a business is, how web savvy it is already. They then get personal attention from a techie somewhere in the community who helps them develop their online presence. And not just a website, but also really think through a digital strategy to complement their business and become part of their ongoing business plan. More about Digital Main Street there. And they have online tutoring sessions and classes to get everybody up and running and online. Mesa, Arizona has done a similar thing where they've put together sort of a program that offers, with some of their CARES Act money, some grant assistance with a lot of technical assistance and training to help businesses rethink their business plans. ChowNow, which I mentioned earlier, is adamantly committed to small businesses, and their services are completely commission-free for the restaurants. The people who pick up the food are the ones who pay the fee for their service. And they're helping businesses develop their own websites. This is one in my neighborhood that I love that never really had a website before, and now they have a really pretty sophisticated one that's completely built on ChowNow's platform for free. So there are a lot of good options there, and I think it's a good role for city governments to help guide businesses to find those resources. Helping business owners re-envision their plans. For some businesses, it will be easy. For others, it's going to be quite complicated. This is obviously kind of an easy decision. But one of the things I'm seeing already is a lot of small independently owned businesses shifting a larger percentage of their storefront space to order fulfillment because their sales are shifting online. You can see in this one that there's sort of a curtain on the left-hand side where they're dividing off their showroom from a very crowded and sort of ad hoc order fulfillment system. I think we're going to see much, much more of that happening. I'm already beginning to see districts, shopping malls and downtown districts that are launching sort of district-wide delivery services for the downtown businesses or the shopping mall businesses to help them get a handle on this. Everyone's probably seen this. I think this is just a cool example of a business that pivoted. This is an animal rescue farm in Southern California that has llamas and vicuñas and camels and things like that. And early on in the pandemic, when they suddenly had no admission fees, and that was most of their revenue, they pivoted and started offering rentals of their animals for your Zoom sessions for like $75 an hour. So you can have a llama come crash your Zoom meeting. This one, the service is called Goat to Meeting, and they're making more money now than they actually did through admission fees. This I thought was a good example of a small business pivot. This is in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a second generation family jewelry store. The younger generation has taken over it now. And when they were thinking about how do we come through COVID, what they decided to do was they looked at web analytics to see how people were shopping on their website. And what they found was that people who were shopping for engagement rings for solitaires would tend to look for loose diamonds first, and then they would look for a setting. And so they literally rearranged their cases so that when you walk into the store, you see their branded merchandise. But then these cases here are cases of basically loose diamonds in grids, just like the grids you would see them framed in on a website. And it's made it easier for people to be able to look at their website, find the loose diamond they want, and then look at it in the store. So they're literally mimicking the way that someone would shop for things online. This is another great pivot. This is a business that was making UV filters to help jewelers detect fake diamonds from real ones. And they realized all of a sudden, oh, UV is good at cleaning the air of viruses. So they pivoted very quickly, doubled their staff from 10 to 20, and are now beginning to ship out UV filters for air purifiers. We're also seeing a significant shift towards using storefront windows, not just for displaying merchandise, but as more active components of a sales system. So really trying to entice people to look at what, sure if that's gonna, yeah, here we go, at what the store can offer, and bringing that experience that you once had inside the storefront into the storefront window. This is a window display for scarves, and what they've done is just put a couple of digital display screens with videos of women blowing, and there's a small fan just behind it that when the woman blows, it makes the fan look like it's blowing in the breeze, bringing that experience right into the storefront window so that people don't have to go into the store to experience that kind of cool thing that they get from shopping in person. Helping businesses create new distribution channels has always been important, but man, is it important now. For years and years, I've tried to encourage businesses to do curbside pickup, and within 2 weeks, every small business in America seemed to have learned how to do that. But we need to move even further than that. Shipping, order fulfillment from online sales, deliveries. This is one of those communities that's doing downtown-wide deliveries services within the region. This is a company that has a yarn store in Southern California, didn't have quite enough market demand in the community where they were based. So they put together a yarn truck and they travel from community to community to get additional sales. There's the inside of the van. This is a vending machine. It's been cut into a recessed doorway in the front of a butcher shop. It's a refrigerated machine, so it's safe, of course. And lots of cross-merchandising. I'm seeing this popping up everywhere. This is an example from Texas, a Texas-based grocery store chain that almost as soon as the pandemic hit began offering to give storefront space, shelf space inside their store to locally owned restaurants that had to close to in-store dining, in-restaurant dining. So now people can pick up some of their favorite meals from their favorite local restaurants as they're doing their grocery shopping. That essentially is how department stores have always functioned, where clothing manufacturers and housewares manufacturers rent square footage from the department store, and the department store provides the sales and staff service. I think we're going to see a lot more of this beginning to come back. I wanted to say something, talking about later and moving into those systemic problems. There are many, many crises coming out of this pandemic. One of them is that we're seeing so much new vacant commercial space popping up. That was a trend that had happened, it was in place before the pandemic. The pandemic is dramatically accelerating it. And we're seeing roadblocks to businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses getting access to capital. Many of them were shut out of the PPP process for that reason because they lacked a banking relationship. Things like this are going to be important for us to begin focusing on as we think about our next comprehensive plans, our visions for our communities, all the derivative ordinances that come from our comp plans, so that we're kind of breaking through some of these things. The first of these is to set appropriate limits for new commercial development. A number of communities have been working on this for years anyway, limiting the size of new commercial buildings until more of their vacant square footage has been absorbed. It's going to become absolutely crucial now. A few years ago, there were kind of scary statistics about how many shopping malls were likely to be closing, by 2025. Now I'm seeing pundits say that the number of enclosed regional shopping malls in the US could be cut by 2/3 by the end of this year. It's happening very, very quickly. We're going to have a big glut of vacant commercial space on our hands. And some of it can be repurposed, of course, for housing, for workspace, for fulfillment centers. But we're going to have to look realistically at how much going, after the recovery, it's realistic for us to be able to support, and how can we make sure that our planning and land use laws are reflecting what is a more realistic measure, so that we aren't left in the future with large, gaping vacancies that drive down property values and depress the community. I want to skip to strengthening community-based banking. This has obviously been a big thing that's popped out during the pandemic, is that small community-owned banks tended to be able to process more PPP loans for small businesses much more rapidly and effectively than the big national banks were able to. And in that, there are many lessons to be learned. There's some racial justice and equity lessons to be learned in there, but one of the things that's just critical for us is to take a new look at the CRA, which has been, by the way, recently revised during the pandemic, and make sure that our communities are really focusing on local lending and local capital. One of the things I really liked, I saw that early in the pandemic, Fresno County, California's government pension system, their staff were looking around and thinking, instead of buying investments, investing in this big sort of national portfolio of who knows what, shopping malls and retirement funds, whatever it might be, maybe we should be making investments locally and buying local mortgages and local small business loans, so that we're improving liquidity for greater small business lending capacity in Fresno County. And that story, I think, is beginning to get some resonance, and communities around the country are beginning to pick up on it and do similarly. This is sort of gets to the gist of it. The pandemic has accelerated and amplified the flaws in our financial system, one that is built from the top down to serve the few, not the many. Refocusing economic development on small businesses. I think that another thing that the pandemic has kind of brought home is that all the billions of dollars that local governments and state governments have spent trying to lure big companies over the years, maybe is not the best use of that money, and instead we should be hunkering down and building a good, strong small business development infrastructure locally, and making sure that we have the banking resources for it. Because things like the big restaurant delivery apps have shown that money, the $16 billion valuation that Postmates has now, has come directly from the cash registers of locally owned restaurants. We're distributing wealth out of communities, and we need to focus on building local wealth to be equitable. And there are communities that are beginning to focus on this, bringing their economic development agencies downtown as a way to state, yes, small business is really important to us. Communities that are developing incentive programs that are very small business friendly. This is a forgivable loan program from Waterville, Maine, that was funded by tax increment financing revenues from the downtown TIF. Helps the district attract the kinds of new businesses that it needs to strengthen out its retail mix and make the downtown stronger as a whole, and reduces some of the risk for entrepreneurs launching new businesses. Another great example of a financial incentive program, this one's from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which did a restaurant development program for a mostly vacant block on the edge of the community. They used some of the city's block grant money to basically pay off the debt service on the loans that the restaurateurs needed to take out to get their businesses started for the first 2 years. It wasn't a grant. The restaurants had to pay it back at the end of the 10-year loan period, but it gave the restaurants 2 years of breathing room to kind of get their feet on the ground, not have to pay off big debts for furnishings and equipment, and establish a clientele. Make zoning more business friendly. This is sort of an easier one to look at, but I still come across interesting kind of pitfalls. This is an example. This is an auto sound business that I came across in Massachusetts some years ago. It's a company that sells and installs car CD players and radios and things like that, speakers. And their kind of hook was that the company, which was a mom and pop owned business, had a fleet of delivery and installation vans. So instead of having to take your car to their facility and leave it for the day, they had a van that would come to you and do the installation or the repair work at your office or your home, wherever you were, which was great for customers. They thought they should have a showroom downtown where they would have more visibility. So they rented a space, moved in. They were there for a couple of weeks, and the zoning inspector came around and said, I'm sorry, but your business is classified as an automotive business, and automotive businesses are not allowed in the downtown historic core. And they're like, well, we don't do any of the automotive work here. This is just basically a retail, you know, sales space. All the installations done off site. He said, I'm sorry, you're classified as automotive. You have to leave or we're going to fine you. And so they moved out of the downtown. I guarantee you that if you comb through your zoning regulations, you're going to find weird little things like that, now is the time to begin thinking about fixing. This is also a good time to consider adopting a formula business ordinance. An ordinance that basically says we want diversity in the kinds of businesses that we have. One of the things that's been happening just in the past few weeks is that because commercial real estate is in a distressed state right now, rents and values are dropping because of accelerating vacancy, is there are some REITs that are coming in and buying up lots of property, planning to eventually populate them with chain stores. So in this moment, there's sort of we're on a sort of a pivot line where healthy, diverse, eclectic downtowns might become more chain focused, and that sort of erases and erodes some of the character that that distinguishes them from other places within the marketplace. So it's kind of a good time to consider adopting a formula business ordinance, so that we don't have this kind of thing happening down the road. Also adopting a local first procurement policy. This is something that a lot of communities are struggling with now because they're trying very hard to funnel municipal sales to small businesses, and finding that they don't quite have the infrastructure online and in the real world to make that happen. So it's a good time to focus on that. I know that Lexington, Kentucky has been experimenting with an online platform for small business procurement for local government, and would love to hear a little bit more about that, maybe from Mayor May later, about how it's going. Promoting options for small business owners to own their property. As property values drop and property becomes a little bit distressed, this could be a good time to help business owners buy space so that they have control in the future over rent increases. This is an organization in Port Washington, Wisconsin, that came together basically as a shareholder company, an LLC, to essentially do that, to create their own businesses, develop their own property, and with a vision of the downtown that match their needs. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is the importance of building local and regional supply chains. When the pandemic started and I began hearing about this, I was thinking, oh, this is going to mostly affect manufacturers and big companies. And then I began hearing from like one person shop electricians saying there's some component that I can't get because it's only made in China now. I was talking to a jeweler who said that all of her jewelry comes from Italy, her designer jewelry, and Italy was in lockdown, and she couldn't get it. We've always had small manufacturers scattered around our communities, in downtowns, in sort of secondary street locations. And it's going to be really important that we begin to work with incubators, accelerators, small business development centers, and think about within our region, what are the sort of product needs, supply needs that our big organizations have, and try to produce some of those locally and on a regional basis. This is an example that happened pre-pandemic. This is a guy who was a tailor in Texas, who mostly made wedding gowns and bridesmaids gowns for weddings, and pivoted, partnering with a community college to teach people in the community how to do production sewing, and began picking up contracts from some big labels. So it certainly can be done, and it's something I think we're going to have to pay some attention to in the future. With that, I'm going to stop and close for any questions that you might have.